Hey there, Tony DeWitt here. I'm a retired Missouri attorney now living my best life on a beach in Florida. I offer content and commentary on current events in the law as well as some general legal topics, but I do not dispense legal advice by video. With that understanding out of the way, here's what we're discussing today. Well, I promised you a video about the end of the CNN trial, so here goes. And I'm sure by now you have all seen this clip.
In the Circuit Court of the 14th Judicial Circuit in Fort Bay County, Florida, case number 22608CA, Zachary Young, plaintiff versus Cable News Network, Inc., defendant. Verdict form number 1. Do you find by the greater weight of the evidence that defendant CNN committed defamation per se against plaintiff Zachary Young? Yes. Number 2, do you find by the greater weight of the evidence that defendant CNN committed defamation by implication against plaintiff Zachary Young? Yes. Number 3, what is the total amount of plaintiff Zachary Young's damages for both lost earnings in the past and for the loss of his earning capacity in the future, reduced by the amount that plaintiff could have earned from comparable employment? $4 million. Number 4, what is the total amount of plaintiff Zachary Young's damages for pain and suffering, mental anguish, inconvenience, injury to reputation, and loss of capacity for the enjoyment of life that he sustained in the past and that he has sustained for the future? $1 million.
As you all may know, CNN has been sued multiple times for defamation. Devin Nunes sued CNN back in 2019, and CNN was successful in having it dismissed. Nicholas Sandmann sued them for $275 million, and that case was settled before it could go to trial. And that's generally been the modus operandi, so to speak, of CNN in litigation. It first tries to get rid of the lawsuit via motion practice, claiming either what was said was opinion or that it was true. When that fails, and it looks like they might have to go to trial or go through discovery, in most cases, they settle. That's certainly what happened in the Nicholas Sandmann case. For that reason, it's a little odd that Zachary Young's case made it into trial and then through trial to a jury verdict. I would have thought that CNN would have done almost anything to keep those awful text messages out of the public domain. I especially thought they would want to hide this one since I have altered it just a little bit to stay within boundaries of YouTube, but you can see he says, "We're going to nail this Zachary Young fellow." Uh, the other guy says, "Yeah, we're going to hold you to that one, cowboy." So that was not particularly good, and it makes it look like CNN is doing assassination journalism, so to speak. So the jury awarded him $5 million, which seems like a lot of money until you realize that he has to pay his lawyers. If that was all he was going to get, he'd probably keep about $2.75 million, and he'd likely be taxed heavily on the remainder. But the real kicker for CNN wasn't the $5 million, which is really just pocket change for them. They probably spend more than that in an average day. What was the kicker was the fact that punitive damages were found to be warranted.
Number 5, do you find by clear and convincing evidence that punitive damages are warranted against defendant CNN? Yes.
For purposes of a refresher, punitive damages are awarded to punish wrongful conduct and deter future wrongful conduct. They're not compensatory. The guidelines for punitive damages vary from state to state. For example, in Missouri, if you get a $10 million punitive damage award, $5 million of it goes immediately to the state, which may not seem fair, but that is the way it works. A defendant can't be punished for certain things, and in terms of constitutional protections, that's one of them. The other one is that it has to bear at least a reasonable relationship to the amount of compensatory damages. Now, the Supreme Court has said that a multiple of 9 times the amount of compensatory damages is the high end of the punitive damages spectrum. So if we look at this case, 9 times 5 equals 45 million. That's really the most that the plaintiff could hope to win and the most that the judge would likely allow. That said, after the verdict was read, the trial moved into the second phase. Much the way that a murder trial has both a guilt phase and a punishment phase, a civil trial with a viable punitive damages claim is bifurcated. Once the jury determines punitives are warranted, then they get to hear the basis for the award, starting with the financial condition of the company. The reason they do it that way is because they don't want a whole lot of talk in the compensatory phase about how much money CNN makes, particularly when their income stream is around $2.1 billion a year. In this case, after the jury decided that punitives were warranted, they had to open up that second phase, and just like the first phase, it begins with opening statements. And in this case, both plaintiff and defendant made opening statements. Let's look at the plaintiff's opening statement first.
You've also decided how we felt that CNN's conduct in this case is deserving of punishment. That a message needed to be sent in some form to media that the conduct, hunting a man down because you don't agree with his ideals, is not okay. It's un-American. The only way we can send a message at this point is through a fine. It's by punishing CNN where it hurts, the bottom line. We're going to do our best to be brief today and to get our case presented very quickly. The law tells us that we cannot punish someone until we know how much they are worth. So to punish CNN, you need to know how much they are worth. To help you understand how much CNN is worth, we're going to call just two witnesses. You're going to see some tape from CNN CFO, where we ask him some questions about CNN's financials. And you're going to hear from our expert, our financial expert, who's specialized in reading company financials, and he's going to help you understand what CNN's balance sheets show about their net worth.
Although the lawyers here are young and would appear to be somewhat new at this, they clearly understood that long-winded dissertations here are not warranted. They kept their opening to what was going to be presented, and then they turned it over to defense. Now, at this point, I should mention what my good friend Lou Accurso, one of the greats of the Kansas City trial bar, told me about his multiple million-dollar verdicts when I asked him how he got them. He said he never got $1 million from a jury. And I looked at him kind of funny, and he said there was always a defense lawyer who got it for him. That came to mind during the closing of the defense in the case in chief, where they argued truth, which was nonsense, and where they claimed that Zachary put himself in the middle of the story, which clearly he did not. They put him in the middle of the story. You can't lie to a jury. You can't gaslight a jury. They heard the evidence. Basically, you can argue the facts, but a closing argument that says, who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes, is probably not going to be well received. So while I had some criticism of the defense lawyer in the main trial, he seems to have been taken to the woodshed by the jury's verdict.
So obviously, it goes without saying that we're disappointed in the verdict, but that doesn't mean, as I said, that you all didn't do your job. As a trial lawyer, you come in and you hope the jury agrees with you. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. But the first thing I said yesterday, and I still firmly believe, is that you want a jury who's going to go through the evidence and they're going to really put the time in. And obviously, you all did that.
That was an especially smart way to start this part of the trial, basically by acknowledging, hey, I heard you. I had a trial once many years ago where someone didn't do that and basically said something to the effect of, you made a huge mistake here. And that did not go over well. So I give him kudos for that part of his opening statement.
But just because you found that CNN is liable in this case doesn't mean that CNN is unredeemable. And it doesn't mean that CNN should be buried. Doesn't mean that CNN isn't important. And let me just give you a few examples of that. You heard General Young, plaintiff's expert, testify, and he kind of made this offhand comment. I thought it was very interesting. He said he was watching the coverage of the wildfires in Los Angeles, which are really heartbreaking. And he said that CNN's coverage was outstanding.
This is a really good example of a trial lawyer paying attention and using what he has, using the tools that are presented to him, sort of the gifts of watching what happens during the trial and taking note of it. And he took note of the fact that one of the experts here, an expert for the plaintiff, said good things about CNN. And the point that he's trying to make is you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
So you've made a decision that CNN's liable, but that doesn't mean that there isn't, a reasonable path forward. So over the next few hours, I hope it doesn't take that long, you're going to hear about CNN's net worth. And you're going to see that the net worth of the company is actually in a subtle decline. You're also going to hear about the headwinds facing the entire media environment. Media is changing really quickly. You're going to hear some of the details about that. CNN still is a valuable asset because of what it does, because of that important information that it delivers. But there are really big challenges that it faces. And you're going to hear that for that reason, almost any amount of punitive damages, and even your verdict right now, will serve as a real punishment. And I'm not coming here to tell you that what you all have done should be the end. You've decided that punitive damages are warranted. So I'm not going to tell you that some number isn't warranted. But I am going to tell you that your judgment has an effect. What you've already decided has an effect. So, Sergio, I'm not going to tell you that. I am going to tell you that your verdict already has an impact. When a media company like CNN that says that we value trust, our trust with the world, when you have a verdict like this, it delivers a message, and you've done that with your verdict.
So he recognizes that the jury disagreed, and he doesn't tell them they made a mistake. That's a display of humility that's been missing throughout the trial. But he did the absolute right thing here. Several years ago, as I said earlier, I had a punitive case where the defense lawyer got up and said, hey, you made a mistake. But this was a good opening gambit here for the defense counsel. Now, he goes on to talk about why CNN needs to stay in operation, but I fear he was talking to a group of people who were not inclined necessarily to see it that way. People in the Alabama and Florida area call Panama City the Redneck Riviera, and it's a fitting name. And I mean, I'm not slamming rednecks, because rednecks do, at least in this part of the world, sort of make the world go around. And they're nice people. They're primarily blue-collar folks who like to go out and have a beer on the weekends, and there's nothing wrong with that. And the Panhandle is full of them. But they also are probably the most die-hard red people of the red states, so they tend to vote Republican. They're not apt to think that CNN is particularly effective at communicating the news. This would have been a hanging jury on that note. And so he winds up telling him to be gentle, and I think he did as effective a job here as he could, given that situation. He understood what he was facing. He closed by mentioning that, you have to punish them for what they did in this case. You can't consider any of the other cases. And I think that may have been a little bit of a mistake, because in the back of the mind, those people in that jury box are going, hey, yeah, that's right. Nicholas Sandman sued him, and a bunch of other people have sued him. This is a defamation factory, which, by the way, it really isn't. Most of the time, 98% of the time, they are not defaming people. They may get facts wrong. They may have opinions that other people disagree with, but they are not defaming people, because you can't defame someone with an opinion. And they do tend to be a lot more opinion-oriented than actually news-oriented. And for that reason, I think that's probably a good thing for them, that most of what they put out is opinion. The reason you can't be held liable for someone's opinion is that nobody has to buy into that opinion. When you say, Mr. Smith over there was corrupt because he did this or he did that, as long as you get the because he did this and because he did that right, it doesn't matter that you think that he is corrupt, because anybody can consider the source and determine that your opinion doesn't matter. So for that reason, opinions are usually protected, First Amendment grounds, and that's the right thing to do. But clearly this lawyer understood what he was facing. Now, after that, Mr. Young put on his economist, and I won't put you through that. He argued that the imposition of punitive damages based on $2.1 million in revenue came out to about $210 million. Yikes. That's just a bit steep, and it's never going to fly. Even if the jury came back and awarded $210 million, he wouldn't get that. That's because of the prior Supreme Court opinion that essentially says 9 times is as far as you get to go. But they put that number in the jury's mind to give them an incentive to go big. Here's what the lawyers know. They know if the jury comes back at $210 million in punitive damages, it will have an impact on Warner Brothers Discovery stock value, and it will make it much easier to settle that case. That's going to scare the stockholders, and just suggesting it makes the CNN C-suite people very, very nervous, as we'll see here in a second. But before they could put on more evidence, the judge had to rule on a motion in limine. Again, refreshing, a motion in limine is a motion that's filed to suppress all or a portion of testimony. And of course, the defense was arguing that a lot of CNN's chief financial officer's testimony should not be allowed. So the judge had to sort of sort through that. And then in the midst of that, the lawyers came to him and said, hey, we've reached a settlement. But that took quite a while, and as a result, the judge had this to say about that.
Didn't bother to bring it. I know there were some attorneys still in the courtroom, but the note earlier said, "Hi, did you forget us? It's 5 o'clock somewhere." Y'all may be seated. I did not forget about y'all. However, as sometimes comes up in the course of a case, there's estimates of amount of time that things may take to get worked out or deal with, and sometimes they take a little bit longer. But your patience by being back there was actually a fortuitous thing, and your participation over the last 2 weeks has actually been a beneficial thing because the parties have reached a settlement of the remaining part of the claim. So you will not need to hear any further testimony. You will not need to go and deliberate any further. And we've concluded the trial. So your patience in my few minutes, I think, or whatever it was the first time or second time I said 15 or so, it ended up being beneficial to the parties. So, you all have been here for 10 days. You paid close attention. You've asked some great questions throughout the course of the trial. You all spent a long time late in the last night and this morning deliberating the case. And I can tell you on behalf of the court, I appreciate it. It's definitely on behalf of the parties. They both want to express their appreciation to you. Sometimes parties can work things out, talking amongst themselves. Sometimes it takes necessity of getting here, presenting the case, putting on witnesses, putting on evidence in front of y'all, hearing the things that you're asking them. And in this case, obviously, you deliberated part of the case, but it's a beneficial part of the process of parties sometimes being able to work it out. So, and they have told me when they came back and announced that they reached a settlement, they told me that being here and having y'all give us your time and attention for the last 2 weeks was an important and a big part of assisting them and getting to that sort of resolution. So don't feel like your time was wasted because it was very beneficial from the standpoint of getting this to a conclusion. Now, having said that, I'm at a point where I can discharge you from your service as a jury.
The settlement is, of course, confidential, just like Sandman and some of the other cases where they had problems with defamation. They chose to do a confidential settlement, which means that the parties cannot reveal how much was paid or how much was received. So the question arises, why put up such a big defense only to cave in at the end? Well, there's all kinds of forces on all sides of this thing that want different outcomes. CNN wants to, in this case now, to fix the liability and not leave it up to the discretion of a bunch of North Florida citizens. They have a stock price to think about, and they have a reputation to think about. And if it settles quickly and becomes old news, nobody's going to talk about it after the end of this week. Since there's no money to talk about, there's no way for Fox or any other network to weaponize this case against them. If they work out a deal, they can take this out of the jury's hands and relax. The only person at CNN who isn't happy about this is Alex Marquardt. He just cost his boss a ton of money, and if he had hopes or dreams of a pay raise in this lifetime, they probably are gone now. the most trusted name in news. It apparently isn't anymore, at least in the Florida Panhandle. If they'd been hit with a big number of damages and forced to appeal, they would have had to keep the old boy on the payroll in the unlikely event that they got a new trial. You don't fire people who are good at their job, and part of their defense was that this was truth. So you don't fire him. But you do fire people who, in text messages, promise to get someone and then use an Oedipal reference to the man. So once the dust settles in a few weeks, Alex will announce he's going off in a new direction, exploring alternative media spaces or something similar, because 5 will get you 10 that his future at CNN is not bright. Of course, that's only my opinion, and I could be absolutely wrong, and obviously I wish all these folks the very best. Now, the plaintiff's lawyers would love to have gotten that $210 million punitive award, as it would have gone on their billboard advertisements, and it would have looked really cool. But they have to do what their client wants and what's in the client's best interest. And the upside of a settlement is, even a confidential one, you can get things that you couldn't get in court. They could get, for example, an apology. And they could avoid a costly appeal that, knowing CNN, could probably go all the way to the Supreme Court. So how much money did they get? Well, we'll never know for sure unless it comes out in the SEC filings of Warner Brothers Discovery. But given that the plaintiffs wanted $210 million, but were looking for $21 million in compensatory damages, my guess is that the raw number it settled for is somewhere around $20 million. The big thing for Young is that he gets more than he would have gotten if he'd taken the risk on an appeal, and he can start his life and his business over now. I have to say, I try never to talk about how people look, because for the most part, people can't help how they look. And that would be the pot calling the kettle black. But when you compare the photo on Law and Crime's thumbnail of this case to the stone-faced look he had in that courtroom, he looked to me like someone who was clinically depressed. And he wasn't faking it, because he kept that look the whole time. It looked like at any moment he was ready to bust out crying. He looked just miserable. And I'm sure he was miserable. Those guys turned his life upside down and got him to made persona non grata in the intel community. They cost him his security clearance and his relationship with other vendors. Overall, this is a big win for the plaintiff, and to a certain extent, the settlement removed the risks for CNN, which can now hide the amount that they paid. And I'm sure right now, CNN feels like it dodged a pretty good-sized bullet. Thanks for watching my video. If you have a request for me to cover a topic, please send me an email to the address above, and in the subject line put video request. If you have comments, drop them in the comments down below. If you found the content worthy, please consider subscribing. Since I started doing this work, I have always asked listeners to consider doing just one kind thing every day to make somebody else smile or make their life better in some way. Please consider doing that. It makes the world a better place. Now, YouTube has some suggestions for other videos of mine you may find interesting.